I came home expecting silence and found my front door hanging open like a mouth that had already screamed. The lock was shattered, the frame splintered, and my living room looked like it had been punished instead of searched. Furniture overturned, drawers ripped out, cushions slashed, papers thrown with anger instead of curiosity. And standing in the middle of that destruction was HOA Karen, smiling like she'd finally broken me. She didn't flinch when she saw me. She didn't apologize. She didn't even pretend this was a mistake. She told me it was a compliance inspection and said I should be grateful they caught my violations early. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules anymore. This was about humiliation. Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? I stood in the doorway letting the scene burn itself into my memory because I knew, instinctively, that every detail would matter later. The air inside my house felt wrong, like it had been stirred violently and never settled back into place. The couch was flipped, legs pointing toward the ceiling like it had tried to crawl away. My coffee table was cracked clean through, the wood split where someone had kicked it instead of stepping around it. Books were everywhere, not fallen but thrown, pages bent, spines broken, knowledge treated like trash. This wasn't searching. This was a message. HOA. Karen stood with her hands on her hips, head tilted slightly, enjoying the view the way someone admires work they're proud of. Behind her were 4 men wearing matching polo shirts, plastic badges clipped on crookedly, eyes darting between me and the floor. Fake authority wrapped in cheap fabric and borrowed confidence. They looked less like officers and more like kids caught playing dress-up in the wrong house. HOA Karen spoke first because she always spoke first. She told me I was obstructing community standards. She told me my locked cabinet raised red flags. She told me force was necessary because I hadn't been cooperative. Her voice had that practiced calm people use when they think they're untouchable. I didn't answer right away because my eyes had found the hallway. My office door was open. The filing cabinet was on its side, metal dented, lock torn out like a tooth ripped without anesthesia. Papers I recognized instantly were scattered across the floor, pages that should never be seen by anyone without clearance. Addresses, names, notes that could get people hurt if the wrong eyes landed on them. My pulse didn't spike. It went cold. I asked one question, and my voice didn't rise when I said it. Where is my wife? The room shifted when I spoke, like gravity leaned in. HOA. A Karen's smile twitched for half a second before she caught it. She said my wife had been uncooperative. She said her officers had to restrain her. She said it like she was explaining a parking ticket. That was when my hands clenched. Not in anger, but in control. The kind of control you develop when losing it would get someone killed. I walked past HOA Karen without acknowledging her authority, because it didn't exist to me anymore. The kitchen looked like it had been rummaged through by people who enjoyed invading space. Cabinets open, drawers yanked out, contents dumped without care. My wife was sitting at the table, posture rigid, eyes steady in a way that told me she'd already moved past fear. Her sleeve was torn. Her arm was bruising fast, finger-shaped marks blooming dark against her skin. She didn't cry when she saw me. She told me what they did in a flat voice that carried more rage than tears ever could. She told me they twisted her arm behind her back. She told me they smashed her phone when she tried to call for help. She told me they laughed while they did it. I stood there listening, cataloging every word, because part of me already knew this moment wasn't going to end quietly. HOA Karen followed us into the kitchen because she needed to stay in control of the narrative. She started listing violations like nothing significant had happened. Truck placement, flag bracket length, locked cabinet contents. She spoke like she was reading groceries off a list, not standing in a home she'd just violated. When I told her to stop, she actually looked offended, like I was interrupting her performance. That's when I asked her if she knew what I did for a living. She guessed wrong, and the way she guessed told me everything about how she saw me. She thought I was small. She thought I was contained. She thought I was another man she could pressure into compliance with enough paperwork and noise. I pulled out my phone and made a call I never wanted to make from my own kitchen. I identified myself by name, title, and badge number. I reported a home invasion. I reported assault. I reported compromised federal materials. And I requested immediate response. The silence after that call was heavy and unmistakable. HOA Karen's face went through confusion first because her world didn't have room for consequences, then denial Because people like her believe rules only move in one direction. Then fear, when she realized the direction had changed. I told her exactly what cabinet she'd broken into. I told her what kind of information she'd scattered. I told her what happens when fake authority collides with real law. One of her men made a sound like he'd lost air from his lungs. Another went pale enough to look sick. They suddenly understood they weren't volunteers anymore. They were suspects. When the real officers arrived, the contrast was brutal. No shouting, no posturing, no plastic badges. Just quiet movement and practiced authority filling the space HOA Karen thought she owned. She tried to explain herself while nobody listened. She tried to cite bylaws like they were shields. She tried to assert control in a room that no longer recognized her. I watched her confidence collapse in layers, each one peeling away as reality pressed in. Standing there, I realized something important about people like HOA Karen. They rely on silence. They rely on neighbors not pushing back. They rely on fear, dressed up as order. The moment someone refuses to play along, the whole illusion starts to crack, and mine cracked loudly. What she didn't know yet was that this was only the opening moment. What she didn't understand was that by breaking into my home, she hadn't asserted dominance. She'd written her own ending. Every lie she told, every camera she turned on, every order she barked was about to be replayed under lights she couldn't control. The neighborhood that watched her rule was about to watch her fall, and the quiet man she thought she could bully was done being quiet. I didn't move into that neighborhood looking for peace, power, or a fight. I moved there because I needed quiet, the kind that lets your mind slow down after years of chasing chaos for a living. I had spent most of my adult life stepping into situations other people run away from, hunting men who didn't want to be found, men who thought borders, aliases, and fear could erase what they'd done. When you live that way long enough, home stops being a place and becomes a reset button. That house was supposed to be that button, a clean line between the world I enforced and the life I protected. That's why I chose a place that looked painfully ordinary. Trim lawns, predictable streets, nothing that stood out. I didn't want attention. I didn't want authority. I wanted anonymity. The irony is that anonymity is exactly what HOA Karen feeds on. She doesn't go after the loud ones first. She goes after the quiet ones, the ones who don't announce themselves, who don't posture, who don't immediately resist. People like me. From the day we moved in, she clocked me as someone who would fold eventually. She saw a truck she didn't like, a man who didn't brag, a wife who smiled politely and minded her business. To her, that looked like weakness. To me, it was restraint. I noticed her patterns early, even before she noticed mine. Years of federal work teach you how to read people the way most never learn. She didn't enforce rules evenly. She enforced them strategically. She went harder on people who lived alone, people who were elderly, people who didn't have the energy or resources to fight back. She used paperwork like a weapon and embarrassment like leverage. Every notice was written to sound official, every interaction framed as generosity barely covering contempt. She never yelled unless she thought she'd get away with it. She never threatened directly unless she'd already boxed someone in. That's not confidence, that's predation. My wife saw it too. The way neighbors stiffened when HOA Karen walked by. The way conversations stopped mid-sentence when her car rolled through the street. People smiled at her the way hostages smile in photos. We heard stories whispered at block gatherings, stories about fines that made no sense, about inspections that felt invasive, about volunteers who took pictures through windows and pretended it was about safety. I listened and filed it away the same way I file everything. Pattern first, evidence later. What HOA Karen never knew was that authority, real authority, had shaped every part of my life. Not the loud kind, not the performative kind, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it's backed by law, process, and consequence. I had worn a badge long enough to understand its weight. I knew exactly when to use it, and more importantly, when not to. In my line of work, flexing authority at the wrong time gets people killed. So I learned to disappear when I could, to let others underestimate me, to let silence do the work. That's why I never corrected her assumptions. When she hinted that I must be some low-level government clerk, I let it sit. When she spoke down to me like I was a problem tenant instead of a homeowner, I didn't push back. When violation notices started showing up for things that weren't violations, I didn't march into meetings or threaten lawsuits. I documented, I photographed, I saved emails, I measured twice and wrote once. Because I knew something she didn't. People who abuse fake power always escalate. They can't help themselves. Control is a drug, and tolerance builds fast. Each notice got pettier than the last. A truck that offended her sense of aesthetics. A flag bracket she claimed was an inch too long. A trash can allegedly visible for minutes longer than allowed. None of it was about rules. It was about reminding me she could intrude whenever she wanted. It was about testing boundaries. And every time I refused to react the way she expected, it pushed her closer to the edge. The creation of her so-called HOA police was the turning point. That was the moment her fantasy crossed into delusion. Volunteers in matching shirts, plastic badges clipped on like toys, walkie-talkies crackling with fake urgency. She didn't call them volunteers. She called them officers. She didn't say patrol. She said enforcement. She spoke just carefully enough to sound legitimate to people who didn't know better. I knew better the moment I saw them. Real law enforcement doesn't cosplay. Real authority doesn't need costumes. Still, I said nothing, because silence is disarming. Silence makes people reckless. I watched them walk the streets at night, flashlights cutting across lawns like they owned them. I watched them photograph houses, scribble notes, whisper into radios, and I watched HOA Karen stand at the center of it all, basking in the attention like she'd finally built the kingdom she thought she deserved. She didn't see what I saw. She didn't see a force gaining strength. She saw an audience clapping. The drone confirmed it. Surveillance without consent, hovering over my yard like a challenge. That wasn't about safety. That was about intimidation. She wanted me to know I was being watched. She wanted my wife to feel it too. And when I brought it down, when I forced one of her men to look me in the eye and realize he was out of his depth, something shifted. She went quiet. Not because she was done, because she was planning. People like HOA Karen don't retreat. They regroup. They tell themselves the story they need to justify going further. In her mind, I wasn't a homeowner anymore. I was a threat to her authority, a symbol of disobedience. And symbols must be crushed publicly. That's why she waited until I was gone. That's why she brought witnesses. That's why she livestreamed it. She wanted the neighborhood to see what happens when you defy her. What she didn't factor in was that real authority doesn't disappear just because it's off duty. It doesn't turn off when the badge isn't visible. And it definitely doesn't tolerate impersonation, assault, or the compromise of protected information. She thought she was enforcing compliance. In reality, she was assembling evidence against herself, piece by piece, in front of an audience she couldn't control. By the time I walked back into my house and saw the damage, the story was already written. She just didn't know she'd signed it. My background, my training, my restraint, all of it had led to that moment. Not so I could explode, but so I could respond with precision. Because the most dangerous thing for someone like HOA Karen isn't anger, it's consequence. And consequence was finally awake. HOA Karen didn't build her power overnight. She engineered it slowly, methodically, the way parasites always do, attaching themselves to systems that already exist and feeding until the host can't tell where the boundary ends and the abuse begins. On paper, the HOA was nothing more than a neighborhood agreement, a list of rules about grass height and paint shades, a committee meant to handle trash schedules and shared spaces. In practice, under her grip, it became something else entirely. It became a private regime where fear replaced consent and compliance replaced community. She didn't need police powers. She didn't need real authority. She only needed people to believe she had it. Her genius, if you can call it that, was understanding that most people are terrified of paperwork. They're terrified of fines, liens, threats written in official language they don't fully understand. She weaponized that fear. Every notice she sent was carefully worded, stacked with references to articles, sections, subsections, most of them twisted just enough to sound absolute. She never said might. She never said please. Everything was must, will, failure to comply. She wrote like a judge and spoke like a warden, and over time the neighborhood forgot the difference. The board meetings were theater. She controlled the room from the moment she walked in, seating arranged to face her like a courtroom. podium-centered, microphone adjusted to just the right height so she could look down when she spoke. Questions were tolerated only if they were weak. Challenges were shut down immediately, reframed as disruptions or hostility. She loved the phrase, "out of order," loved it because it let her silence people without addressing what they said. And the board members sitting beside her, hand-picked, obedient, learned quickly that nodding was safer than thinking. Then came the escalation, the so-called HOA police. That was the moment her fantasy crossed into something far more dangerous. She didn't introduce them as volunteers. She introduced them as an enforcement body. She talked about patrols, about authority, about keeping the neighborhood safe from non-compliance. She blurred the line intentionally, knowing most people wouldn't push back hard enough to clarify it. Uniforms appeared, badges appeared, radios appeared, and with them, a shift in behavior that was immediate and chilling. Men who had once been just neighbors suddenly walked differently, straighter, louder. They started pointing flashlights where they didn't belong. They took pictures without asking. They stood on sidewalks and stared at houses like they were targets. All of it sanctioned by HOA Karen. All of it justified under the banner of community standards. She gave them purpose, and in return, they gave her muscle. Not real muscle, but enough to intimidate people who didn't know their rights or were too exhausted to defend them. She created a hierarchy that fed itself. Complaints flowed upward to her. Orders flowed downward to them. If a homeowner resisted, the response escalated automatically. First a letter, then a fine, then surveillance, then a visit. Each step framed as reasonable, each step pushing the boundary a little further. By the time someone realized how far it had gone, they were already drowning in threats and paperwork. And HOA Karen thrived in that space. She thrived on escalation because escalation proved her importance. What made it worse was how public she made it. The Facebook group, the live comments, the shaming posts disguised as updates. She didn't just want compliance. She wanted examples. She wanted the neighborhood to watch people get broken into silence so no one else would try. That's why she encouraged filming. That's why she let her enforcers joke, laugh, brag. Humiliation wasn't a side effect. It was the point, and all of it rested on one fragile lie, that her authority was real, that her papers carried weight beyond the imagination of a woman who had never been told no in a room full of people afraid of conflict. She counted on the fact that no one would challenge her structure head-on, because to do that, you'd have to understand the law better than she pretended to. You'd have to stay calm while she provoked. You'd have to let her overreach instead of stopping her early. You'd have to let her build the case against herself. That's what she never understood. Power built on fear always demands escalation. It can't stop. It can't stabilize. It has to keep proving itself, louder and harsher every time, until it finally collides with something real. And by the time HOA Karen sent her fake police into my home, by the time she turned intimidation into invasion, by the time she crossed from harassment into crime, her structure was already rotting from the inside. She just didn't hear it cracking yet, but it was cracking, loudly, and the sound was about to carry far beyond her little kingdom of clipboards and costumes. The moment HOA Karen's fake police left my house, the noise didn't stop. It lingered. The silence afterward wasn't relief. It was pressure, the kind that presses against your ears when something catastrophic has already happened, and your body is just now catching up. My living room still smelled like sweat and cheap cologne. Furniture lay where it had been thrown, drawers ripped open, documents scattered like they'd been intentionally disrespected instead of merely searched. But the real damage wasn't the mess. It was the violation, the realization that she hadn't just crossed a line, she'd erased it completely. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't chase them. I didn't explode the way she probably expected. Instead, I did what I've been trained to do my entire career. I slowed down. I cataloged. I remembered everything. Because when someone commits a crime this brazen, this arrogant, this confident that they're untouchable, the truth is already sitting there, waiting. You just have to be patient enough to collect it. The proof started with what she didn't bother to hide. The live stream. HOA. Karen loved attention too much to operate quietly. She believed exposure was power. that broadcasting her authority made it real. She never considered that recording a crime doesn't turn it into enforcement. It turns it into evidence. The video was still up when I checked. Multiple angles, multiple phones, comments scrolling by in real time while my home was being destroyed. Laughing emojis, jokes, people cheering the humiliation like it was entertainment. She had turned my house into a stage, and in doing so, she documented every felony herself. I saved everything, not just the video, but the metadata, timestamps, usernames, upload histories, who shared it, who commented, who encouraged it. That mattered because it showed intent. It showed coordination. It showed that this wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident. It was planned, celebrated, and repeated. HOA Karen didn't panic during the raid. She smiled. She narrated. She explained her authority to an audience. That confidence would become the rope she wrapped around her own neck. Then came the paperwork. The so-called compliance warrant. The document she waved around like a badge. It looked official enough to scare people who didn't know better. Header, seal, signature, dense language. But the more you read it, the more it unraveled. No statutory reference, no issuing authority, no jurisdiction. Just invented power written with absolute certainty. I'd seen forged warrants before. This one wasn't even subtle. It was cosplay on letterhead. I compared it to actual legal templates. The differences were glaring. Wrong terminology, incorrect formatting, clauses that contradicted one another, sections that cited laws that didn't exist. She hadn't copied the law. She had imagined it, and imagination doesn't hold up under scrutiny, especially not federal scrutiny. The witnesses came next. They always do. Once people realize someone is finally willing to stand in front of the bully instead of behind them, the silence breaks fast. Doors open, emails arrive, folders appeared. Years of fear poured out in the form of saved notices, photos, recordings, handwritten logs, people she'd fined, people she'd threatened, people she'd cornered when no one was watching. Every story different in detail, identical in pattern. What emerged was not a single incident, but a system, a pattern of escalation designed to test resistance. Start small, increase pressure, use shame, use surveillance, use her fake police as intimidation tools. And if someone still didn't bend, push harder until they broke or moved away. That pattern matters, because patterns destroy plausible deniability. They turn excuses into strategy. I built the timeline carefully. Every violation notice dated, every patrol logged, every post archived. You could see it clearly when laid out end to end. The moment her authority was questioned, the moment someone didn't react with fear, the response intensified. That's not enforcement. That's retaliation. And retaliation under the color of authority is one of the fastest ways to turn a neighborhood tyrant into a criminal defendant. The final piece was jurisdiction. The simplest part. The part she never bothered to check because she assumed no one else would. HOA authority is narrow, limited, conditional. It does not include entering homes. It does not include detaining people. It does not include impersonating law enforcement. And it absolutely does not include overriding state or federal law because you feel like it. That boundary is not fuzzy. It is razor sharp. And she crossed it repeatedly. By the time I finished assembling everything, the picture was complete. Not emotionally, legally, logically. Clean lines connecting actions to consequences. Proof that didn't rely on outrage or sympathy, but on her own words, her own documents, her own recordings. She had built a fantasy kingdom and documented every brick herself. And the most dangerous thing for someone like HOA Karen isn't anger. It isn't confrontation, it's exposure. Because once the illusion of authority collapses, there's nothing left underneath it but the person who abused it. And that person doesn't get to hide behind a clipboard anymore. The discovery phase wasn't about revenge, it was about certainty. About knowing that when the confrontation came, it wouldn't be loud or chaotic or debatable. It would be inevitable, because the truth was no longer scattered across broken furniture and whispered complaints. It was organized, it was backed up, and it was ready to be put in the light. The confrontation didn't start with shouting. That's what people expect. They imagine slammed doors, raised voices, chaos spilling into the street. That's not how real collapses happen. Real collapses happen quietly at first, when the person who believes they control everything realizes, too late, that the room is no longer reacting the way it used to. HOA. Karen didn't know it yet, but the moment she called that emergency board meeting, she had already lost. She thought she was summoning her court. She thought the room would tilt toward her the way it always had. The same folding chairs, the same community center, the same faces trained by years of fear to nod, agree, stay quiet. She believed the setting itself guaranteed obedience. What she didn't understand was that fear only works while people think they're alone, and I had already made sure they weren't. I arrived early, not to make a statement, but to watch. Watching tells you everything. The way people enter a room, the way they avoid eye contact, the way they whisper before sitting down. HOA. Karen stood at the front, clipboard clutched like a life raft, smile sharp and rehearsed. She was performing authority, not realizing the audience had already stopped believing in the act. She opened the meeting the way she always did, with procedure and posture, reminding everyone of standards and order, and how lucky they were to live somewhere so carefully managed. The words were familiar, the cadence unchanged, but the response wasn't there. No murmurs of agreement, no nervous laughter, just stillness. The kind of stillness that makes liars talk more, not less. She moved to the issue she'd clearly been waiting for. Me, my property, my non-compliance. She spoke about the inspection as if it were routine, justified, necessary. She framed it as protection, community safety, risk mitigation. The language of someone who has said the same lie enough times that she believes repetition turns it into truth. She even smiled when she mentioned my wife, describing resistance as if it were a technical inconvenience instead of an assault. That's when the room shifted. Not loudly, not all at once. Just enough. A chair scraped. Someone crossed their arms. Another person leaned back instead of forward. These are small things, but they matter. They're the first cracks in the dam. HOA. Karen felt it. You could see it in the way her voice tightened, the way she over-explained points no one had challenged yet. Control slipping always sounds like that. I stood then, not fast, not dramatic, just enough movement to pull focus without demanding it. She stopped mid-sentence. She hadn't planned for interruption. Not real interruption. She asked me to sit down. She didn't order. She asked. That was the first mistake. I told her calmly that the inspection she was describing was a crime. Not in theory, not subjectively. A crime. Recorded, documented, and already reviewed. I didn't accuse. I stated. There's a difference. Accusations invite argument. Statements invite silence. The room went quiet enough that you could hear the HVAC kick on. She laughed. A short, sharp sound meant to project confidence. She said I was being dramatic, that I was trying to intimidate the board, that people like me always think rules don't apply to them. That line had worked for her before. It didn't work now, because someone behind her laughed too. Not with her, at her. That's when the first neighbor spoke up. Not loudly, not angrily, just truthfully. He asked if it was normal for inspections to involve crowbars. Another asked since when board members were allowed to restrain residents. A woman near the back asked why her fines had doubled after she complained last year. HOA? Karen tried to answer all of them at once. That's what panic looks like when it's still wearing a smile. She attempted to regain control by invoking authority, by saying the board had voted, by reminding everyone of consequences, liens, fines, legal action. The threats sounded hollow now, not because they weren't scary before, but because everyone in that room had just watched them fail. Threats only work if people believe you can follow through, and she had already shown she couldn't. That's when the evidence came out. Not from me. That's important. From the screen behind her, the live stream, frozen frames, her voice narrating the raid, her fake officers laughing, the crowbar, the cabinet, the comments scrolling by like applause at a circus. You could feel the oxygen leave the room. People didn't gasp. They didn't shout. They stared, because staring is what happens when denial finally dies. HOA. Karen turned around slowly, like she might wake up from it. She didn't. She tried to claim it was edited, taken out of context, a misunderstanding. But you can't explain a crowbar out of context. You can't soften assault with tone. You can't argue with your own voice, smiling while someone else is being hurt. The room turned on her without anyone raising their voice. That's the part people don't expect. Collapse doesn't need rage, it needs clarity. One by one, people stood, not to attack, to separate, to move their chairs away from her table, to sit closer together, to physically remove themselves from her orbit. Power is proximity, and she was suddenly alone. She tried one last time. She demanded the meeting be adjourned. She said the discussion was out of order. She said she would handle this privately. That phrase finally did it, privately. After everything, after the broadcast, after the lies. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. It was relieved. Years of pressure venting in one sound. When the actual law enforcement entered, there was no drama, no announcement, no spectacle. Just badges. Real ones. The kind that don't need explanation, the kind that don't ask permission, HO. Karen's face changed then. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. The kind she'd cultivated in others for years, now turning back on her. She protested. Of course she did. She said they had no jurisdiction. She said this was a civil matter. She said she knew her rights. People always say that right before they realized they never knew them at all. The charges were read, calmly, clearly, each one landing like a weight she couldn't push away. Her fake officers didn't move. They didn't defend her. They didn't speak. They stood exactly where they were, realizing too late that cosplay doesn't protect you when the consequences arrive. One of them tried to explain. Another tried to blame her. Neither helped, because Collapse doesn't care about excuses. As she was escorted out, she kept talking. That surprised no one. Control addicts don't know how to stop performing. But no one listened. Not one person followed her. Not one voice defended her. The room stayed where it was, watching the door close behind the person who had once terrified them into silence. And just like that, it was over. Not emotionally, not legally, but publicly. The illusion had shattered. The authority she'd built on fear and repetition evaporated in front of everyone she'd once dominated. There would be hearings. There would be consequences. But the most important part had already happened, the moment she lost the room. Because once people see the truth together, it can't be undone. And HOA Karen had just learned the most dangerous lesson of all. When you turn power into performance, eventually the audience stops applauding. The retaliation didn't look like revenge. And that was the part HOA Karen never understood. She expected anger. She expected lawsuits fueled by ego. She expected shouting matches and messy escalation she could spin into victimhood. What she didn't expect was expertise. Quiet, methodical, professionally lethal expertise that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. While she was still insisting she'd been misunderstood, the system she'd tried to impersonate was already moving around her. Real systems don't posture. They document, they verify, they cross-check. Every email she'd sent, every notice she'd issued, every message her fake officers had posted was being cataloged and preserved. Not for spectacle, for structure. Because structure is what turns chaos into consequence. This was the phase where nothing looked dramatic from the outside. No sirens, no cameras, just people in offices doing what they do best. Compliance officers comparing timestamps. Investigators reconstructing timelines. Legal analysts mapping behavior patterns across months instead of moments. The difference between amateurs and professionals is patience, and HOA Karen had never dealt with patience before. Her first mistake was continuing to talk. She emailed. She posted. She tried to rally sympathy. Each message contradicted the last. Each explanation added another layer of inconsistency. Professionals love inconsistency. It's how intent gets proven without anyone needing to speculate. She framed her actions as protective. The data framed them as targeted. She claimed routine enforcement. The records showed selective escalation. Same violations, different penalties, depending on who challenged her authority. That's when the experts stepped in. Not neighbors, not board members, specialists. People whose entire careers revolve around identifying abuse of power disguised as procedure. They didn't argue with her narrative. They ignored it. They compared actions to statutes. They matched conduct to definitions. Trespass, assault, impersonation, obstruction. Each term precise, each threshold met, each conclusion boringly airtight. She tried to hire her way out. Lawyers arrived with confidence and left with concern. Because confidence collapses when facts don't move. Every attempt to minimize was met with documentation. Every attempt to isolate an incident was countered with pattern evidence. One break-in becomes excusable. A series becomes strategy. Strategy becomes intent. Intent becomes criminal. The expert reports were devastating not because they were harsh, but because they were unemotional. They described her behavior the way engineers describe structural failure. Load exceeded tolerance. Safeguards bypassed. Authority assumed without basis. Harm predictable and ignored. There was no outrage in the language, just inevitability. Her fake officers didn't fare better. They claimed they were following orders. Experts noted that orders don't override law. They claimed ignorance. Experts noted that ignorance doesn't excuse restraint, destruction, or impersonation. They claimed community service. Experts noted that service doesn't include breaking doors or live streaming private property. Each defense collapsed under the weight of specificity. The community watched this phase with confusion at first. Nothing seemed to be happening. That's because real accountability isn't theatrical. It doesn't perform for an audience. It builds quietly until there's nowhere left to run. HOA Karen mistook silence for victory. She thought the absence of noise meant the storm had passed. She didn't realize she was standing in the eye of it. Then the filings began. Formal notices, not warnings, findings, letters that didn't ask for response, documents that didn't negotiate, each one narrowing the field of excuses until there were none left. She was advised to stop communicating. She didn't. Every message she sent became another exhibit, another footnote, another nail. The experts didn't just dismantle her actions, they dismantled her structure. The board procedures she'd hidden behind were examined and found wanting. Votes taken without quorum, amendments enforced without ratification, enforcement protocols invented without authority. The house of rules she'd built collapsed under audit the way it had never collapsed under complaint. What made this phase unbearable for her wasn't the threat of punishment, it was irrelevance. She was no longer the center of the story. She was a case study. Her name replaced with the subject. Her authority replaced with citations. Her voice reduced to transcripts reviewed by people who had never met her and didn't care to. Expert retaliation isn't loud. It's suffocating. She attempted one final tactic. Public appeal. She framed herself as persecuted, as a volunteer punished for caring too much. Experts responded the same way they always do. They checked the math. Time spent enforcing. Time spent targeting. Disparities in fines. Language used in communications. Emotional framing doesn't survive spreadsheets. By the time the conclusions were finalized, the outcome was no longer a question. It was a sequence. Administrative consequences followed by criminal referrals. Civil exposure layered on top, each domain independent, each reinforcing the other. The system doesn't pile on out of spite. It converges when everything points the same direction. The neighborhood began to understand what was happening only when the tone changed. Letters shifted from HOA language to legal language, from notice to finding, from compliance to liability. People who had been afraid to speak started asking questions. Not emotional ones, practical ones. What happens now? Who's responsible? How do we fix this? The experts answered those too. They outlined remediation, dissolution of authority, restitution pathways, safeguards to prevent recurrence, not punishment for its own sake, correction. The thing HOA Karen had pretended to care about while actively undermining it. She tried to interrupt that process. She filed motions. She demanded hearings. She accused. None of it changed the trajectory, because expert retaliation doesn't react, it proceeds. And once it does, the only choice left is how quietly you let it finish. Her final statements were smaller, less confident, less coherent. Gone was the language of supremacy, replaced by pleas for understanding, for context, for mercy. Experts don't grant mercy, they grant accuracy. And accuracy had already sealed her fate. By the time the recommendations reached their final form, the conclusion wasn't emotional, it was procedural. Removal, disqualification, referral. The end of her role not as a dramatic downfall, but as a clerical correction. A name struck through. A line item closed. The retaliation was complete, not when she was punished, but when her influence vanished. When her emails stopped arriving. When her name stopped being invoked. When the systems she'd abused continued functioning without her. That's the difference between vengeance and justice. She wanted to be feared. Instead, she became footnoted, and that, for someone like her, was the most devastating outcome possible. The victory didn't arrive with applause, press releases, or a triumphant speech. It arrived quietly, the way real endings always do, when the noise finally runs out of places to hide. One morning, the emails stopped. No more threats, no more notices, no more capital letters pretending to be authority. The silence wasn't peaceful at first. It was unfamiliar, like standing in a room after a machine shuts off, and realizing how loud it had been the whole time. The neighborhood adjusted, slowly. People didn't celebrate. They recalibrated. Doors opened more often. Conversations lingered. The subtle tension that had lived under every interaction began to dissolve, replaced by something awkward but honest. Relief, mixed with disbelief. The kind that comes when people realize the thing they feared is actually gone. HOA Karen's name stopped coming up in conversation. Not out of respect, out of irrelevance. Her rules were no longer enforced because they no longer existed. Her presence faded the way a bad habit does when you finally break it. No confrontation, no closure scene, just absence. Official letters arrived weeks later, formal and emotionless. Findings concluded. Authority revoked. Recommendations enacted. The words were dry, procedural, almost boring. That's how you know they matter. Nothing dramatic hides inside them. Only finality. The fake police were gone too. The uniforms disappeared. The patrols stopped. The walkie-talkies went silent. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now waved without hesitation. Some apologized without being asked. Others didn't say anything at all, which was fine. The point wasn't confession. It was correction. The house stayed standing. The door closed properly again. The rooms returned to order. Some things couldn't be undone, but they didn't need to be. The message had already landed. The line had been drawn and held. What surprised me most wasn't the satisfaction. It was the lack of it. There was no rush, no surge of triumph, just a steady sense of balance being restored. Like watching a scale finally settle after being tipped too far for too long. People sometimes expect justice to feel loud. They expect fireworks. But real justice feels like weight lifting off your chest. Like waking up and realizing you're not bracing for impact anymore. The neighborhood learned something without anyone needing to say it out loud. Authority isn't declared, it's defined. Power isn't worn, it's granted. And when someone pretends otherwise, the system doesn't argue, it waits. Then it removes them. There was no final encounter, no last words exchanged, no apology. None was required. Her story ended not with humiliation, but with disappearance. The kind that erases influence, not memory. She became a reference point, a lesson, a quiet warning embedded in experience. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm. Lawns got uneven. Decorations varied. People made small choices without asking permission. The world didn't fall apart, it normalized. And that was the victory. Not domination, not revenge, just the restoration of something simple and fundamental. The understanding that pretending to be in charge doesn't make you so, and that when you mistake fear for respect, you eventually lose both. HOA Karen went silent.